بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والعاقبة للمتقين والجنة للموحدين، ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الخلق والمرسلين سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. All praise belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the greatest of blessings and salutations upon our Master Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, we continuing today with our 21st lesson on the Umdah al Salik or Umdah al Salik by Imam Ahmad ibn Aqib al-Misri rahimahullah ta'ala. In our last class, Alhamdulillah, and this is our second class in the blessed noble city of Tarim, where this text has been taught for many centuries, many decades, or many centuries, and many scholars and students have benefited from this text. And we ask Allah again, as we did in our previous presentation, that He allows us to benefit from the knowledge of all those scholars that taught and are teaching the Umdah al Salik within this blessed city. Ameen, Ya Rabbal Alameen. So I'm hoping to cover at least 3 or 4 classes while during my stay here in the city of Tarim. The program is very, very full. We are living through the last few days of the month of Rabi'ul Awwal, and all the big holidays in the various masajid are taking place, and we are just trying to benefit from the company of the guys, even though we do understand that our Mashaykh taught us that classes of knowledge are always to be given preference over the gatherings of dhikr and the gatherings of salawat such as the mawali. Now, in our previous class, we covered a number of points. We had a number of discussions. I don't have the slides in front of me, so I'm just trying to recap from memory primarily. We had discussions such as the ruling of standing and urinating with an excuse, without an excuse. We had the discussion regarding of speaking in the lavatory, speaking while urinating or passing stool, speaking while in the lavatory, before urinating and passing stool, and after. We spoke about istibra. We spoke about being particular about keeping the aura covered, and other such etiquette, how one should enter the lavatory and how one should exit. We said that this chapter that is known as the adab, the etiquette of the adabu qadi al-hajj, qada al-hajj, sorry, the etiquette of relieving oneself, that adab consists of both that which is recommended and that which is compulsory. And even though the chapter primarily discusses recommended things to do while in the lavatory, the next point is compulsory. And that's where we're going to begin reading. If you can follow from the text, I'm reading from the section that reads وَيَحْرُمُ إِسْتِقْبَالُ الْقِبْلَةِ وَاسْتِدْبَارُهَا. So if you are able to find that in the text, and then we could read it together, inshallah. يقول المصنف رحمه الله تعالى نفعنا الله بعلومه وبكم في الدارين آمين. ويحرم استقبال القبلة واستدبارها ببول أو غائط في الصحراء بلا حائل، ويباحان في البنيان إذا قرب من الساتر نحو 3 أذرع، ويكفي مرتفع ثلثي ذراع من جدار ووهدة ودابة وذيله المرخي قبالة القبلة، فالاعتبار في الصحراء والبنيان بالسترة، فحيث قرب منها على 3 أذرع وهي ثلث ذراع جاز فيهما، وإلا فلا إلا في المراحل فيجوز مع القراءة وإن بعد جدارها أو قصر. Now, so this is the short section that remains of the etiquette of the usage of the lavatory. And we're going to cover this hopefully very quickly, inshallah ta'ala, and then we move on to istinja, inshallah. So he speaks about facing the qibla and turning one's back to the qibla. In our previous dars, he spoke about facing the moon and the sun in Baytul Maqdis, and facing one's back to the moon and the sun in Baytul Maqdis. And we discussed that, so I'm not going to return to it right now. Of course, saying that there is no problem in facing your back to the moon and the sun, while facing the sun or the moon while relieving yourself makruh and similar, facing Bayt al-Maqdis with your front or your back is considered to be makruh. Now, here we're speaking about the Qibla. This is it's a very different discussion because the Qibla is something that facing the Qibla while relieving yourself is something that was prohibited on the time of the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and therefore the discussion requires it requires more discussion, and one needs to, of course, practice much more scrutiny and much more caution. Now, I'm just looking for the narration. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه به في كل الأخوات وعلى آله وصحبه. نعم. Interesting. So, when we're speaking about relieving oneself and abstaining from facing the Qibla, then the ruling now changes from a recommended etiquette to a compulsory etiquette. And it's compulsory for you to abstain facing the Qibla with your front or your back while relieving yourself. However, it is only haram to face the Qibla with your front or your back if a number of things are not in place. Number one is that if there is no veil in front of him, between him and the Kaaba, whether that veil happens to be inside the building or outside the building, whether it's a veil that you erected or whether it's a temporary veil or whether it's a permanent veil. لا يجب إلا إذا لم يكن ساتر. However, the veil between you and the Kaaba or the Qibla also has to follow a number of conditions. The first condition is that in terms of its length, it has to be 2/3, and in terms of its length, it has to be 2/3 of a dhira. 2/3 of a dhira. The challenging thing with the dhira is similar to our discussion we had when we spoke of the kullatain, the manner in which scholars differ. Sheikh Ali Jumaa in his Al-Makair al-Mawazin al-Shar'iyya, he in most instances he's taking from Najmuddin al-Qurti. I haven't double checked over here, but he says that the dhira is 61.8 centimeters. So 2/3 of the dhira would be 2/3 of 61.8 centimeters, which means you're looking at about 40 centimeters, 45 centimeters high. The idea here is taking into consideration the person that is seated on the ground, squatting on the ground. And this is a very important point to make. Because the objective is not to be precise in thuluthai dhira. Many become focused on the height of the sutra or the side between the person relieving himself on the Qibla has to be thuluthai dhira, which is approximately 40 centimeters. However, the idea is that you must be covered from the Qibla. There must be something veiling you. So when you're squatting, that's fine. However, if I'm standing and urinating, and we covered the ruling of standing and urinating last week, then for the very least the veil has to reach my navel. Similarly, if I'm a big person and a 40 centimeter barrier does not cover me while facing the Qibla and urinating, then that size does not suffice. Also, today we have seated toilets. Our toilets are generally one sits. You're not squatting. You're sitting as if you're sitting on a chair, a pot. And it's important to keep in mind that when using a sati while sitting on a pot, then also it must be covering. At least it should be covering up until my navel, so that the awra and the part of my body with which I'm urinating is blocked off or covered or veiled from facing the Qibla or facing my back to the Qibla. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are some important things to keep in mind. It's wajib not to face the Qibla, but it's only wajib, and you're only guilty of making haram if there is no veil between you and the Kaaba, or the veil does not cover the awra adequately whether squatted, whether standing, or whether sitting on a pot. The jurist mentioned 2/3 of the dira, which based on the calculations of Shaykh al-Jum'ah is around 50 centimeters. However, the focus is not the length, whether it's 40 or less. A person can be very small and then a 30 centimeter satir will suffice. Whereas a person can be very big and then a 40 centimeter satir will not suffice. So keep that in mind. Other condition is that the satir may be more than 40 centimeters through the dira. However, you're sitting with a problem that the distance between you and the satir is more than 3 diras. So based on the calculations of Shaykh al-Jum'ah, that's going to be 180 centimeters, 1.8 meters. I've seen others saying 1.5 meters. And of course, the dira is something that differs. I didn't get into the detail now because I'm really trying to cover as much work. There's a lot of pressure to cover a lot of work for me to cover a lot of work rather. So, but we're going to have to visit the detail of the habba and how the habba comes, determines the measurement of the dira and how different habbas wrote about different measurements. And I'm took average habbas and did several tests to get an average of what the dira is going to be and how you ranked that in some of the, I think the previous Mufti of Tariq did a similar test and he reached a particular number of centimeters for the dira when we're discussing Masalat al-Qasr. So I'm going to revisit that discussion inshallah ta'ala when we discuss Masalat al-Qasr, what exactly is the dira and why there are so many opinions as to what the length of the dira is. Because it basically came from a seed and seeds would vary in size and so forth and so on. So I'm not getting into it now, let's just stick to the 61 centimeters of Shaykh al-Jum'ah, 1.8. If the distance between the person relieving himself and the wall in front of him or the circle in front of him is more than 3 diras, then he is also committing haram and it's compulsory for him then not to face the Qibla while doing it. So author rahimahullah ta'ala, he said that وَيَحْرُمُ اسْتِقْبَالُ الْقِبْلَةِ وَاسْتِدْبَارُهَا بِبَوْلٍ أَوْ غَائِطٍ فِي الصَّحْرَاءِ بِلَا حَائِلٍ. It's haram to face the Qibla or your back to the Qibla while urinating, reducing stool in the desert if there is no well. وَيُبَاحَانْ facing the Qibla or facing your back to the Qibla is permissible in a building إِذَا قَرُّبَ مِنَ السَّاتِرِ if he is close to a veil نَحْوَ ثَلَاثَةِ أَذْرٍ approximately 3 diras, which is 1.8 meters, and I said some say it's 1.5. Now, and then in terms of the height of the satir, he says it suffices for the height, وَيَكْفِي مُرْتَفَعٍ, it suffices for the height of the satir to be 2/3 of the dira, which we say is 40 centimeters. من جدار ووحدة ودابة وذيل مرخي قبالة القبلة. Then that satir could be anything. There's no strict rules what should be used and what cannot be used as a satir. So it doesn't matter whether it is a, one second. So it could be a wall, a jidar, right? And what if I remember correctly is a goal. I was just trying to double check that I can't seem to find it anywhere. And my understanding is that if you are perhaps in a lower piece of ground with high ground raising in front of you, so behind a hill or something of that kind, the important thing that is a veil between you and the Qibla. That's the essential thing. No. Or whether there is an animal in front of you, or the tail of the animal is hanging in front of you, as long as there is the veil that is blocking between you and the Qibla. And if it is the satir for the person that is relieving himself outdoors, it's not essential that the satir be broad, that it covers his entire body. So it could be thinner than him, as long in terms of the height, it's covering the height of his awrah. Now, so he said, rahimahullah ta'ala, والاعتبار في الصحراء والبنيان بالسترة فحيث قرب منها على 3 أذرع وهي 3 ذراع جاز فيهما وإلا فلا. So he said that what is considered in both outdoors and indoors, is it all inside of a building, is that there must be a veil. When he is close to the veil, that fulfills the conditions of the veil, such that between him and the veil is less than 3 adhra, and the veil itself is thulutha dhira, which is what is in 10 meters, and it's permissible for him to face the qibla, whether he is outside or inside. وَإِلَّا فَلَا. If these conditions are not met, then it's not permissible for him to do so. In fact, it will be haram for him to do so. There is one exception, however, and that exception is إِلَّا مَرَاحِيل, except in the marahil. So the mirhab is one of the names of the Bayt al-Khala. We looked at a few names of the lavatory. Mirhab was one of them. So a marahil is going to be a place that has specifically been prepared for relieving oneself. What we would refer to there as a lavatory or the toilet. The lavatory and the toilet is an exception. If there is a room in your house that is dedicated for relieving oneself, like behind me is a wall, and between me and the other side of this wall there is a 1, 2, 3, probably 4 meters. If the toilet or the pot had to be here against this wall, and between me and that wall there is 5 meters, but this place is mu'ad liqadai hajat, prepared for the usage of, for relieving oneself, then Ahmad ibn Naqib said it will be permissible, even if the distance between you and the door is more than 3 adhra. However, he said it will be permissible with karaha. It will be makruh and not haram. Irrespective, he says makruh, irrespective whether you are close to the wall or whether you are distant from the wall. وَإِنْ بَعُدَ جِدَارُهَا وَقَصْرُ. So that's an interesting observation over here, because this is one of the areas where Ahmad ibn Naqib gets it wrong. It's not the official view in the madhab. The official view in the madhab is, as Aisha stated in Bushra Kareem and others elsewhere, that when facing the qibla, when sitting in a mirhab, the place that is specifically designed to prepare for relieving oneself, the toilet to lavatory as we know it today, then irrespective whether you are close to the wall or distant from the wall, it is permissible for you to face the qibla or your back to the qibla, mutlaqan in general, and it's not makruh. So this view of karah mentioned by Ahmad ibn Naqib in Umdah is not the official view in the madhab. La ilaha illallah. No. Ibn Hajar, he mentioned that while it's not makruh to face the qibla for the person that is in a room that is prepared for relieving for qada al-hajah, the lavatory and the toilet, he said that if it's possible, even while seated, to slightly turn to your left, to slightly turn to your right, such that you are not facing qibla, and that slight turn that there's no great difficulty therein, then if you still face the qibla, then you will not be committing makruh, you won't be committing haram. It's completely permissible. However, it's khilaf al-afdal. It goes against that which is better, and it goes against that which is preferred. Khilaf al-afdal. This is one of the rare instances in our fiqh where this particular term is used, and I'm going to ask you to, because we did not discuss this in the usul fiqh, but we covered these discussions in our usul fiqh class. I'd love you to look into khilaf al-afdal and exactly where does it fit in, because khilaf al-afdal is not khilaf al-awla. Our jurists, they say, based on the view of Ibn Hajar, facing the qibla, when it's possible we need to slightly turn to my right and my left, in a lavatory or toilet, and the distance between me and the wall in front of me is more than 3 adhra, more than 100 meters, they say that it is not haram, nor is it makruh, it's not even khilaf al-awla. It's mubah. Ibn Hajar said that it is khilaf al-afdal. So khilaf al-afdal is not khilaf al-awla. So exactly where does it fit in? So I'm mentioning this with the idea that some of our brothers and sisters go and do some research and try to read way exactly what Khilaf al-Awwal fit in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya Rabbi, there are many discussions that that could be added over here, but then again, like I said, we don't waste of time. There were some scholars that held the view. No. That it's only haram to face the Qibla while urinating and not passing through. Because passing through will be behind you. And it's only, in other words, استقبال القبلة بالبول حرام. أما استقبال القبلة بالغائط فليس بحرام. واستدبار القبلة بالغائط حرام. وليس استدبار القبلة بالبول حرام. So they say that it's haram to face the Qibla while urinating, but not haram to face the Qibla while passing through. And they say it's haram to face your back to the Qibla while passing through, but it's not haram to face the Qibla while passing through. You see, that is, Jury said that is incorrect. The Mu'tamad is that facing the Qibla or your back to the Qibla with the spout, urine or stool is haram. And this, of course, you have the veil as we discussed previously. The Prophet ﷺ said, إِذَا أَتَيْتُمْ الْغَائِطِ, if you come to the ghaib, meaning the place where you relieve yourself, فَلَا تَسْتَقْبِلُوا الْقِبْلَةَ, do not face the Qibla, وَلَا تَسْتَدْبِرُوهَا, neither show you back to the Qibla, بِبَوْلٍ وَلَا غَائِطٍ وَلَا شَقِّقُ أَوْ غَرِّبٍ. Don't face the east or the west, and that of course refers to those living in the Arabian Peninsula. As for people living in the west, for them to make shaqiq to face the east may mean they're facing the Qibla. And those living in the east, if they want to face the west, they may also be facing the Qibla. And this ruling only applies to the Kaaba, the current Qibla, doesn't apply to the previous Qibla, which is Bayt al-Maqdis, and we covered the ruling of Bayt al-Maqdis. La ilaha illallah. Thereafter, our author commenced with a discussion on istinja. فقال, he said, رحمه الله تعالى, ويجب الاستنجاء من كل عين ملوثة أو ملوثة خارجة من السبيلين لا ريح ودود وحصاد وبعرة بلا رطوبة، وتكفي الأحجار ولو في نادر كدم، وتأقيبها في الماء أفضل، ويغني عن الحجر كل جامد طاهر قالع للنجاسة غير محترم ومطعوم كجلد المذكى قبل الدباغ. فلو استعمل ماء غير الماء أو نجسا أو طرأت نجاسة أجنبية أو انتقل ما خرج منه من موضعه أو جف أو انتشر حال خروجه وجاوز الألياء أو الحشفة تعين الماء، فإن لم يجاوزه ما كفى الحجر. ويجب إزالة العين واستيفاء 3 مساحات، إما ب3 أحجار أو بحجر أو 3 أحرف، وإن أنقى بدونها. وإن لم تبق 3 وجب الإنقاء وندب الإيتاء. ويندب أن يبدأ بالأول من مقدم الصفحة اليمنى ويمره إلى موضع ابتدائه، ثم يعزف بالثاني، ثم بالثالث على الصفحتين والنسب. ويجب وضعه أولا بموضع طاهر ثم يمره. ويكره الاستنجاء بيمينه، وليأخذ الحجر بيمينه وذكر بشماله ويحركها. والأفضل تقديم الاستنجاء على الوضوء، فإن أخره عنه صح، أو من التيمم فلا. نعم. Our author discusses istinja, and we all should have covered istinja already in detail in the Safinat al-Najah. Ahmad bin Umar al-Shatiri in the Nail al-Raja, the commentary on Safinat al-Najah, almost all the detail that you require regarding istinja, and therefore we're just going to revise those discussions, inshallah ta'ala. So he said, an istinja. As for istinja, previously we mentioned that istinja comes on the scale of istif'al, and the meaning of istinja comes from نجوت الشيء بمعنى قطعته. The meaning of istinja is to seek the severing of that which is harmful. طلب قطع الأذى. And shar'an, it refers to the removal of filth that exited from the private, mulawith, that filth that exits, that stains others, that declares or that will make whatever it comes into contact with dirty. That's mulawith. Kharij and najis and mulawith. Do not talk. No. So najasa is to remove that filth, that najis, impure substance, that exits from the private, that is mulawith, that deemed whatever it comes in contact with as impure as well, to remove that from the private, either with water or with stones. And if you're using stones, then you have to ensure that you are fulfilling the conditions of using stones. Now, so when we say that istinja is to remove that which is impure, then if something exits from the private that is not impure, such as a worm or a stone or flatulence, then that will not be considered istinja. Istinja is not compulsory, and removing that from the private is will not be called istinja. However, as for a worm or a stone that a person may have passed, this is hypothetically that they come out in urine or out in stool. So when a person passes a kidney stone and there's no urine that came out of that. That's very hypothetical because it usually comes with urine. If it's just a worm or a stone that the person passes, then because it's pure and not najis, istinja is not compulsory. However, istinja bima'na removing it, not istinja in the technical sense. Because istinja in the technical sense is what? We say that is izalatul kharij najis and mulawwid. No. Min al-farji an al-farji. Bima'in al-hajari. So technically, the removal of something which is dry, such as a stone and a worm, is not considered to be istinja. But removing that is considered to be mandub. Why am I mentioning this now? Because I mentioned three things that comes from the private that are dry. Worm, stone, and number three is wind, flatulence from the backside of it. Why do we say it's recommended to remove these stones and to remove worms? Because if a person was to make istinja on account of a wind that he passed, flatulence, and that is considered to be makruh. Imam al-Jurjani, you see that yukrahu istinja min al-rihi. No. And others supported that view of Imam al-Jurjani. Which is interesting. It's interesting that flatulence is pure, not impure, even though it originates from an impure place. It originates from stool, from the place of stool. However, it is dry. And that is an interesting discussion. I'll tell you what's interesting, even though I'm going to steal some time now. In our country a few years ago, we had a shortage of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is gas that is used in physio soft drinks, such as your Coca-Colas and your Pepsis and so on and so on. And we had a shortage in the country. A company known as Afrox, they weren't able to import a product that they required to make gas with carbon dioxide. And there was a shortage, and of course it brought about a number of challenges. And then we have a company called SA Breweries. That's a South African company that makes beer. And it's partially owned by the government and many other individuals, but SA Breweries never ever bought carbon dioxide from Afrox because they used to produce their own. How did they produce their own? When while making beer, and and fermentation will be taking place within these massive containers. The fermentation process, the chemical process of fermentation, naturally releases carbon dioxide. And the carbon dioxide that was released from the brew, they will capture that, purify it, clean it, and they will push it back into the beers. It's never been an issue because beer is haram, and the gas that was obtained from those intoxicants didn't really matter. And when there was a shortage of gas, there was talk of peninsular beverages, like people like Coca-Cola and other soft drink makers. There was talk of them purchasing gas from SA breweries, a gas of carbon dioxide that was obtained from the brew intoxicants. And then, of course, all the religious authorities were consulted, will this be permissible or not? Gas obtained from najis. Okay. And the fact that I'm discussing it here on this masala, you must already know the point that I'm going to be making, and that is, our teacher, Sheikh Tariq Karam, while many were trying to determine whether to be permissible or not, people are looking at what's this now? What's it called? The same discussion that we usually speak about bovine gelatin, istihala, and other such concept. And I thought I was looking at this rih, which is a gas, it emanates from the place of stool, from a place which is najis, and yet the Jews are very clear that the rih is pure. And so it doesn't mean that if the gas was to emanate from a place that is impure, intoxicants, it is going to be impure, the gas will be pure. Especially after going through a rather thorough process of purifying and cleaning out all fine particles from the gas and so forth and so on. And then there are many other discussions related to it, but I think what I'm really trying to share with you here is that how a simple mas'ala, such as whether a flatulence is pure or impure, from there you are able to deduct a ruling that determined that carbon dioxide obtained from intoxicants is actually tied and could be used in fizzy drinks and the like. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, however, it is said that a person who went istinja from releasing a wind, that person is guilty of committing a fijir makruh. La ilaha illallah. So the mustanji, the person making istinja, he removes harm from himself, filth from himself, other than himself. So istinja is what? He said, وَيَجِبُ الْإِسْتِنْجَاءُ Istinja is compulsory. However, the wujub of istinja only applies to other than Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam, for instance. Why? Because the fadalat, all liquid that comes from the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam is pure. Ala ra'sin sayyid wujud sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Everything that came from him was pure. And therefore, when a Jariya, a young girl, slave girl, or free slave girl that used to work in the home of Rasul sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, used to frequent the home of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, and she drank the urine of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam one day, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam just smiled and laughed about it. And because his urine was not impure, so it was pure. And like him, the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam. And since their urine is pure, istinja was not compulsory to them. No. Thereafter, istinja is not compulsory immediately. Right? Whenever something exits from the private, then it doesn't immediately mean that I have to go and perform istinja. It becomes compulsory when I want to stand up and pray salah. So if you can pray salah, now istinja becomes compulsory for me. Without istinja, I'll remain filthy and I will remain filthy. How am I supposed to perform salah? No. However, if a person has najasa coming out of him, and that najasa leads to him dirtying himself and coming into contact with folk, then that would be impermissible. it's impermissible for him to delay now, he needs to clean himself as soon as he can. La ilaha illallah. And at times istinja can be mandub, recommended. And the example of recommended we say was if a person, by way of example, passes a stone. Even though that is questionable because we say that is not istinja. Istinja is only when you remove filth. And sometimes istinja will be makruh. An example of that is a person who makes istinja after he passes a wind, flat winds. And sometimes istinja will be haram but suffices. When is istinja haram? But despite it being haram, it suffices. If I make istinja and I steal someone else's water and use his water to make istinja, that's a haram istinja, but it suffices. And sometimes istinja is haram and it does not suffice. And that is the person uses food to make istinja. It takes a roti to go and clean himself. Now, so that is haram and it won't suffice. And then it can be permissible as well. And that is if a person sweats on the private area and then he makes istinja to remove that sweat that may have been mixed with najasa, possibly. So he goes, it's permissible for him to make istinja within a compulsory. And as you can see, all five ahkam can apply to istinja, even though the question of the mandu istinja is questionable. لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم. أهلا وسهلا. زين الدين. And then after our author is going to be discussing the ruling of performing istinja with stones and what are the conditions that need to be met in order for istinja with stones to be valid. And then istinja with water, and it's preferred between the two, and so forth and so on. And I'm going to have to cut this class in two. I'm going to end now, and then I'm going to record another class of about 15 or 20 minutes to complete our discussion on istinja. And these two sections together will make a lesson 21, inshallah. And Allah grant us tawfiq and understanding. May He remove all challenges from our path, and He make us true students of knowledge. May He grant us understanding of deen. May yuridillahu bihi khairan yufaqihu fi deen. بهذه النوايا بما نوى سلفنا صالح بما نوى سيدنا محمد وإلى حضرة النبي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم الفاتحة.